In After Effects there are 5 different type of basic shape layers, and they can all be found up in the toolbar by just pressing and holding to see all the options or all the shapes. In the same or following descending order, we have a rectangle, a rounded rectangle, ellipse tool, polygon tool, and a star tool. Then adding one to the composition, just choose one, then press and drag to adjust it a little bit. To scale it proportionally or even, hold shift at the same time when you're dragging it out. Shape layers, just like text layers inside After Effects, are vector graphics, and that means that they are mathematical, so no matter how much you scale them up or shrink them down together, they will always maintain the same details and the same type of good quality. All shape layers have options to add a fill and can be adjusted with any type of color up here. Pressing the blue fill text, there's some fill options available as having none, solid color, linear gradient, and radial gradient. There's the familiar large list of blend modes to choose from, and also opacity between 0 and up to 100%. By choosing any of the gradients, these may be further adjusted by clicking the gradient colored box beside the fill, showing us the gradient editor. Moreover, there's this little blue line and dot. Drag it around to manipulate the direction and the amount of gradient directly inside the shape and composition. One for the fill and the other one for the stroke. Leading us into the next option of the shape layers, strokes. And the strokes are all the outer lines which currently creates the visual look or shapes of all the layers, being adjustable just in the same way as the fill by pressing the blue stroke text or using the color gradient as the current options. One extra variable is the size of the stroke, measured in pixels and adjusted by dragging it up, down, or you can just write in a number here. A small thing perhaps worth mentioning before we're moving forward is that shape layers are synthetic layers, as meaning they don't have a source footage connected to it. And that means that you can't have them or open them in the project panel, as they only exist or live in the actual timeline, if you will. Then a tip: if you create any shape, for example a star, and raise the amount of points with a keyboard arrow up, or the opposite, lower them with the keyboard arrow down, or make any other type of changes, this shape will be saved or exist until it have been reset. So something that's solved by just double clicking the icon and deleting the new layer. As sometimes you can wonder why there's actually this weirdly looking shape coming up every time and not going back to the default, then you actually need to double click it to reset it, so as a little hack. Now let's jump into the first shape layer, the rectangle. And we got a subgroup for transform, which are the basic layer movements that we already seen before. And adding it to 3D space, there's even more familiar variables popping up. Same goes when quickly turning on the render to Cinema 4D or even to Advanced 3D if you prefer. Also having the geometry options plus material options. And same as for the text layer. As these ones are the only differences between the 2D and the 3D or 2.5D, let's head back to the classic 3D renderer and let's dive into the content of the rectangle layer here. Currently, there's only the rectangle one, but when the layer is marked, it's possible to add more shape layers within or connected to this layer, just as more options are addable out here when smashing that add icon up to the very right, adding different paths and other type of variables. But I will come back to those ones within short. Beside rectangle 1, we might play around with the blending, and into the drop-down options the 3 main parts of shape layers are seen. It's the path, stroke, and fill, plus extra transform properties directly to this specific rectangle, also adding the skewing here. Right beside the path options, there's 2 small icons with lines. The left one with the left arrow and right one with a right arrow. Left one has the reserve path direction off and the other turns it on. Then there's a difference digging into the gradient stroke, as going to the quite nice option taper and adjusting the start length. It's now in one direction, but as soon as we hit the on icon, we will flip the direction around. Moreover, inside path, there's options to adjust and animate the size, position, and the roundness. So let's do just that. Create a small animation using these three types of variables or properties, while also adding in a little bit of anticipation using the second of Disney's 12 principles of animation, anticipation, preparing the audience for an action. I will turn off the visibility for the other 4 shape layers and solo the rectangle. First, add a keyframe for each variable in the beginning of the timeline, going forward to half a second, 12 frames here. Dragging up the scale a little bit, plus moving the position back slightly and thus adding some anticipation before moving forward. One more keyframe here as well for the roundness to delay the morphing or the change. Then move the current time indicator quarter of a second more, or 6 frames. I will ramp up the scale here a little bit. Position it to be adjusted down here and drag to the right. And finally the roundness until it's a complete circle. As the movement now is linear or constant, I will mark all keyframes, go to Animation, Keyframe Assistant and choose Easy Ease, giving it a bit more natural look with a slower start and stop. As you probably noticed, the gradient didn't actually follow the movement of the path position, and that is because we animated the path as separate from the other different variables. So whenever we want the gradient to follow, we need to use the main transform properties here in the very bottom for the whole layer, or these transform properties for moving the specific rectangle 1 shape. This animation may be manipulated even further with the graph editor. Now I'm using the speed graph and, for example, changing the movement here by slowing down the stop a bit more than the rest. Some variation to the anticipation, or perhaps slow down the start slightly as well and speed up the mid path. So I just quickly wanted to show a small part of what's actually possible within the graph editor. And I know it can seem a little bit complicated or intimidated almost in the beginning when going into these graph editors, but it's really adding a lot of value to the animation in After Effects, so it's really worth paying attention to. We're moving further down to the gradient stroke options, where there's this alternative for the blending. First, we got the composite, where if I, for example, were to add another stroke here to the add icon, dragging up the width a little bit, it's currently below previous in same group, but might also possibly be turned over and go above the other one. An option to change the gradient type between linear and radial. With radial, there's 2 new options: highlight length and angle. Let's drag up the Y for the endpoint a bit to see this better. And the endpoint, which is this blue dot, representing the end of the gradient, shown in pixels, offset from the center of the shape, which is just the same for the start point, but the beginning of the gradient to be offset. Now, with the highlight length, the gradient might be offset further between -100 and 100%, or spin the gradient around clockwise by turning it up to the positive. Under colors, the gradient is adjustable just as we saw before. Layer opacity, stroke width, and for these line options, adding a trim path, giving us the options to animate the path of the shape layer a bit more, meaning we have the ability to change and animate the start and end of the path anywhere between 0 and 100%. Moreover, it's also possible to combine it with offset to create a type of constant movement. The next one, called Trim Multiple Shapes, is a very handy or helpful one when you want to create an endless amount of similar type of animations or movements of path within a layer, and it's giving us similar strength to what we saw before while using the null object as one controller to rule them all. If I first duplicate the rectangle one, then head down to the trim path for this one and offset it slightly from the other one. Now, moving the whole trim path controller from any of the two inner rectangles, one or two, onto content to add it as a main controller, letting us use the trim multiple shapes to manipulate or animate them both at the same time, using either the simultaneously or the individually for a slight different look. Back again to the line options and zooming in a bit on a corner. The first one up, butt cap. Yep, a little bit weirdly named icon perhaps. No, not that one, I guess. Anyway, it's giving us this motion around the corners, slapping it smoothly around. Round cap will keep that consistent round edges, while projecting cap instead giving us this type of movement around the corners. The line join let us tweak the corners in even finer details with either meter, round or bevel join for everyone's flavor and preferences. Meter limit, this one won't be that noticeable for a normal rectangle layer. So I'll create this quick zigzag shape, if you will, with a pen tool, but now the corners aren't sharp and also cut out of here in the very middle, becoming bevel joint. So to change this, just raise the meter limit and that's the actual use of it. Dashes cut up our stroke in smaller pieces when pressing this plus icon. Change the look with butt, round or projecting cap, while change your animate offset to make them move in any type of direction. The taper is shown in the length units of either percent or as pixels. This variable lets us manipulate both thickness of the start length, giving this cone-looking shape between 0 and 100%, while same goes for the end length in the opposite direction. We may adjust both start and end width and combine them with some easing. Ultimately, there's an option to add some waveform to it actually, so affecting the amount between 0 to 100%, measured units in pixels or cycles, while tweaking the wavelength a bit and make it all move around a bit with using the face. Now, as we cover the first two of the three basic pillars of the shape layers, both the path and the strokes, next one we'll be heading into the fill, which is the coloring inside the actual shapes. Let's start here by toggle on the visibility for the gradient fill and choose the radial type, since this have the same options as the others plus a few extra ones. Composite, same options as the stroke before, below or above. And to illustrate the fill rule, which basically determines what should be filled or colored or not, and count as the inside of a path when the lines are crossing each other. Let's jump into the Star Tool shape layer, and I will make the fill visible. And currently the fill rule is set to non-zero winding, which is also the default. But as we ramp up the auto roundness a bit, creating some crossings between the paths, currently everything inside is filled or colored, but if changed to even odd, then how the fill is counted in relation to the crossings or intersections, those crossings inside the shape will not longer be filled with color. Back into our rectangle, same as with the radial gradient stroke, we may manipulate both the start points X and Y amount and the end points. Drag up the highlight length and spin the angle around plus colors and opacity. Lastly, in the very bottom here of the rectangle 1 contents, there's just those normal transform properties connected to this rectangle specifically. There's nothing really to add to the rounded rectangle and to the ellipse tool in form of new settings or options, but we got some quick extras for the polygon and the star tool. Going back into the star shape under type, we can actually shift between a star and polygon shape, while also set the points down to 3 and up to, well, let's say enough. You may also do this directly when adding a star shape to the comp by pressing arrow up or down while you're continuing holding the left mouse cursor. Arrow left and right adjust the corner roundness, and lastly holding spacebar helps move it around at the same time. It has a rotation for the path directly, so spinning it without moving the gradient, for example. Change the inner and outer radius of the shape, and manipulate both inner and outer roundness as we played around with a little bit before, creating some different and interesting or perhaps weird patterns, if you will. The rest of the settings here will be the same, or at least nothing that we haven't seen before in the rectangle shape. Then to bring the shapes perhaps a little bit more alive and increase their uses a little bit, we have served a few more alternatives under Add to our disposal. Adding a group, as I had the main layer marked right now, the group will be added here to the main content, thus giving the option to, for example, duplicate both the group and the rectangle as well. Now using this one to add as many groups as we want with separate shapes within just one shape layer and still keep it nice and organized. And at the same time, each of these groups will also have their own transform properties to be adjusted or manipulated. I will delete the group 2 again and go into group 1 and rectangle. And let's say we add a new group into this one, and having marked the rectangle 1 first, or if you missed that one, then just drag the whole group between the contents and the specific shape. Turning on the fill again and throwing in just the path and stroke inside this group, well, then it actually becomes possible to use the group transform properties to change or animate the different parts of a shape layer, both together or individually. Next 8 options here that we find on the ad, we might either use them separately, as when adding them to a previous shape, or by creating a new group and build the whole shape from scratch. Let's first create a new group again, then we'll be using a clean path as a kind of base for adding some type of shape that lets us use the pen tool when having the path 1 marked. And I will keep this simple and use the polygon shape as a reference, but it's also usable to draw pretty much any type of shape of your liking or preferences. Then let's add some stroke. we'll be creating a keyframe here in the beginning. Move forward a little bit in the timeline and try match this shape up with the star layer. Including a few more points perhaps, or vertices as they're called. Giving us a toolbox to, for example, morph any type of shape into another or any other type of effect you can think of. A great tool to create a little bit more complex type of animations and merge together shapes to perhaps a little bit more interesting type of objects are the merge paths. Let us duplicate the rectangle path and adjust this one slightly. And now watching the effect directly. I will toggle on the visibility for gradient fill and adjust this one as well by dragging out the start and the endpoints. Maybe a bit different fill colors to this one. Perhaps a little bit dark blue on this one would be nice. And now we're in the add mode, which adds the second shape on top of the other one and create one full shape with joined paths. Then the subtract one will take it away as a small bite of the corner, if you will. Intersect, the area shown where both shapes are overlapping, while exclude intersect, invert that option instead, showing all except for the overlapping area. And the last one, merge. The offset paths help us create these repeating type of patterns that we can use to, for example, backgrounds by increasing the amount a little bit and perhaps adding some more copies. Then dragging down the copy offset or animating by dragging them out of the screen and back in again. Then out for a transition or moving patterns. Change the look a bit by choosing a different line join here between the meter, round or bevel. Pucker and bloat help the creation of some engaging and interesting shapes and animations, and by moving the value up to the positive or down to the negative. Looking a bit differently for all the 5 shape layers though. Use the repeater to give the shape a few more copies. Then the offset and animate them. Either composite below or above, then adjusting and animating it all under the transform. The normal variables that let us manipulate the anchor point, position, scale and rotation. And a cool thing here is split opacity, which giving us this possibility to change start and end opacity, setting this kind of gradual transparency in either type of direction. The round corners, I guess nothing way too crazy here and something that's already been included for these shapes as the very basics. But perhaps it could be useful when you're drawing some shapes with your pen tool and you want to round off the corners a little bit, making them a little bit smoother on the edges. We have the trim paths. This one we already seen and gone through before, but it's a really nice one to add a bit more life to your animations and make the movements appear in a more nice and creative way. With a twist, we can make our shapes dance a little bit, if you will, and spinning with the angle or round and twisting the center up and down or back and forward. The wiggle path throws in the options to more or less offset the path in a zigzag pattern. It's a little bit similar to the wiggly that we saw previous in the text animator, making it possible to adjust the wiggle size or details as inserting more of the wiggles and raising the number. We can also change the points between corner and a little bit of that silky smooth. Wiggle per second, let us animate the speed of the wiggle movement. Correlation of pattern, as with no correlation or similarity at all at 0, and all the way up to 100% for full correlation and full identical movement at 100%. The phase over time is temporal, and scene space is spatial. Also, the random seed matches to layers using the same number, only showing the perception of randomness, if you will. And for this animator, I will first solo the star layer, hiding the other one, and center the layer. Now, if we add the wiggle transform, then instead of wiggling just a path, it will now instead wiggle the whole movement using the 4 transform properties. Then ramp up the position, the scaling, and also the rotation a bit. And if we're playing this now, we have a looping or endless animation, creating a type of wiggle or movement within the amount of 0 and the maximum choice for each property. And as the random seed is at 0 now, it's as random as possible. There's no correlation between the movement. If we were creating 2 different type of movements, like if I duplicate them, but instead choosing, for example, random seed at 1 instead, it will have this identical movement with the illusion or perception of randomness, as already said before. And that's almost it for the shape layers. We'll be just wiggling in for the last add here. Let's finish off here with the zigzag. And this option gives you the ability to set or create many interesting looking patterns, and perhaps currently a little bit like a snowflake, if you will. Then moving around the values a little bit for the size and ridges per segment. While also give a little bit of change to the points between corner and the smooth. And that's it for the shape layer. I hope this helped shape your skills up a little bit within this section.